The desert stretched endless and cruel beneath the late afternoon sun, its copper-colored earth cracked and thirsty, the kind of land that made a man feel small no matter how many miles he'd ridden. Jake Hollister adjusted the brim of his sweat-stained hat and leaned forward in the saddle, his eyes narrowing against the glare as he studied the faint trail below him. He had been tracking the raiders for 2 long days, and though their trail was light, broken branches and churned-up patches of sand betrayed their passage. Each mile they rode, dragging their captive farther from safety, only hardened Jake's resolve. He was no lawman, just a drifter, a cowboy who spent more nights beneath the stars than under any roof. But something about the way he had heard the girl cry out when the outlaws swept through that trading post, something in the sound of her voice had dug itself into his chest. He couldn't ride on, not with that memory gnawing at him. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with strokes of red and gold, he finally caught sight of smoke curling into the horizon. His horse, a lean bay gelding named Cutter, pricked, his ears forward. Jake reined him to a stop and studied the ground. Fresh tracks. He'd found them. Slipping off the saddle, Jake crouched low, running his hand over the earth where hooves had scarred the dirt. He could almost see the scene in his mind's eye. 3 men, rough riders by the looks of their prints, driving hard. The 4th set of tracks was lighter, uneven. That would be hers, walking and stumbling, forced along at rope's end. Jake's jaw tightened. He pulled his Winchester from its scabbard and checked the chamber. Loaded. He took a deep breath, mounted again, and pressed Cutter into a quiet trot. The canyon narrowed ahead, its walls rising like jagged sentinels, shadows creeping longer with each passing minute. By the time Jake heard the crackle of fire and the low murmur of men's voices, the sky had darkened to indigo. He slid from his saddle and tied Cutter behind a clump of mesquite, whispering a soft word to keep the horse steady. Rifle in hand, he crept toward the glow. Through the brush, he saw them. 3 men hunched around a fire, their faces rough with dust and whiskey, laughter hard and mean. A few yards away, bound at the wrists and ankles, sat the girl. Even in the dim light, her beauty was unmistakable. Long black hair spilled loose over her shoulders, catching the fire's glow like strands of polished obsidian. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, her cheek marred with a bruise, but her eyes, dark, proud and steady, did not waver as she glared at her captors. Jake felt something twist in him. She wasn't weeping or begging. She held herself like a warrior, even with rope cutting into her skin. One of the men, broad-shouldered with a scar down his neck, reached for her arm. "Ain't no harm in enjoying our prize 'fore we sell her off," he sneered. The others laughed, but before his hand could close around her, Jake stepped from the shadows. "Let her go," he called, voice cold and steady. The men jerked around, startled, their laughter dying in their throats. The scarred man squinted, then smirked. "And who the hell are you?" Jake didn't bother answering. His rifle spoke for him. The first shot cracked like thunder, and one outlaw fell backward, clutching his chest. The second lunged for his pistol, but Jake swung the barrel, squeezed again, and dropped him where he stood. The third cursed and scrambled to his horse, firing wild as he fled into the dark. Jake let him go. The desert would claim him soon enough. Smoke from the rifle drifted upward, mixing with the campfire's sparks. Jake lowered the weapon and strode forward. The girl hadn't flinched through the chaos. She only watched him with those unyielding eyes. Kneeling beside her, he pulled his knife and cut through the ropes at her wrists. Her skin bore angry red welts where the bindings had bitten deep. His hands, rough from years of rope and reins, worked as gently as he could. "You're safe now," he said quietly. For a moment she said nothing. Then she rose slowly, flexing her freed hands, and looked straight into his face. Her gaze was sharp, appraising, as if she were weighing his soul. Finally she spoke, her voice low and melodic, carrying both strength and warning. "Safe from Them, perhaps, but you have made an enemy for us both. Jake held her eyes, unshaken. I'll take my chances. Something flickered across her expression. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. She pressed her hand briefly to his arm, the lightest of touches, yet it carried more weight than any words. Then she stepped back, scanning the camp, her stance as proud as if she had never been bound. Jake felt his throat tighten. He didn't even know her name, yet already he knew he would never forget her. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of mesquite and blood. Jake holstered his rifle and glanced toward the canyon's edge. Night was falling fast. They would need to move, soon. But for a heartbeat longer, he stood still, watching her, realizing that in saving her life, he might just have lost something of his own. The dawn broke soft and pale across the horizon, the desert sky painted in hues of rose and lavender, as though the land itself tried to soften its edges for one brief moment before the sun returned with its merciless fire. Jake Hollister sat on his horse at the ridge overlooking the Apache encampment below. He had ridden with Nayeli through the night, the two of them silent for most of the journey, save for a few whispered words about water and rest. Now, as the first smoke curled from the village fires and the voices of her people carried faintly through the cool morning air, he knew the trail he had been on was ending. The camp was alive with movement. Women tended to fires and prepared the day's meal, children ran between the lodges with the energy of dawn, and men, proud and tall, looked up as their lost daughter returned. A cry went up when someone recognized her. The sound swelled into a chorus of joy and relief echoing against the canyon walls. Jake felt it vibrate in his bones, a sound older than any word he'd ever spoken. Nayeli dismounted, her feet touching the earth with reverence, as though the soil itself welcomed her home. She wore the same torn dress she had been captured in, but even in its ragged state she seemed to Jake like something untouchable, a flame that could not be extinguished. Her people rushed to her, voices tumbling over one another, hands reaching to embrace her, to prove she was truly back. She returned their affection, but her eyes flicked often toward Jake, who lingered just beyond the edge of their circle. He did not belong here. He knew it, and so did they. Their stares, hard and suspicious, told him as much. A cowboy with dust on his boots and a gun at his hip had no place among them. Yet he stayed where he was, hat in hand, because a part of him couldn't ride off, without hearing her voice one last time. After some minutes, an elder, tall, with hair like silvered coal and eyes like flint, stepped forward. He spoke to Nayeli in their language, his voice deep and resonant, and she answered with the same pride she had carried in her captivity. Jake could not understand their words, but he caught the weight in their tone, questions, gratitude, warnings. Finally, the elder turned his gaze toward Jake, appraising him as though measuring what manner of man he was. Then, with a single curt nod, he turned back into the camp. The crowd thinned, leaving Nayeli standing once more at the space between two worlds, the warmth of her people behind her, and Jake waiting before her. She walked toward him, each step, graceful, deliberate, until she stood close enough that he could see the light of the fire in her eyes, even though the sun had nearly risen. "You have done what many would not," she said softly, her English laced with the cadence of her people's tongue. "You brought me back when the desert could have swallowed me. For that, my people will honor you in their prayers." Jake shifted in the saddle, his throat tightening. "I didn't do it for prayers." She tilted her head, studying him as though she already knew what he meant but wanted to hear him speak it. The silence stretched, filled only by the waking calls of birds in the canyon. At last, Jake found the words. "I couldn't ride on and leave you with them," he said. "Something in me wouldn't let it happen. Maybe it's foolish, maybe it's dangerous, but I'd do it again." For the first time since he had met her, Nayeli's lips curved into the faintest smile, small but radiant. She reached out, her fingers grazing his horse's bridle, then lifting to brush against Jake's cheek. Her touch was feather-light, yet it carried with it a power that made his chest ache. "You cannot stay," she said, her voice like the wind weaving through canyon stone. "Your world and mine do not walk the same path. If you remain, you bring danger to yourself, and to me. There are men who will not forget what you have done." Jake swallowed hard. He had known it even before she spoke. The trail had always been his home, never a hearth or a family. Still, the thought of riding away now felt like tearing his heart in two. "I reckon you're right," he said after a long pause, tipping his hat low to hide the burn in his eyes. "But I'll tell you something, Nayeli. I'd ride 1,000 miles just to hear your name again." Her gaze softened, though sorrow lingered in it like a shadow. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see every detail of her face. The proud set of her jaw, the strength in her eyes, the quiet sorrow she tried not to show. She whispered, "Then let the wind carry it to you. When you hear it in the desert breeze, you will know I am thinking of you." Jake's breath caught, the words sinking into him deeper than any bullet ever could. For a moment he considered, reaching for her hand, asking her to come with him, daring the world to stop them. But he saw the truth in her eyes before he could speak. She belonged here. To take her away would be to steal her spirit, and he could not do that to her, not to the woman who had already given him more than she knew. So he only nodded, his jaw set tight. "Goodbye, Nayeli." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead briefly against his, a gesture as intimate as any kiss. Then she stepped back, her face proud once more, the mask of duty slipping over her sorrow. She turned and walked into the circle of her people, and in that moment Jake knew he would never see her again. He sat there a long moment, watching her silhouette fade among the lodges until she was swallowed by the life that was hers and hers alone. Then he pulled the reins and Cutter shifted beneath him, ready for the trail. Jake cast one last look at the camp, the rising sun catching on the smoke and turning it gold. As he rode away, the desert wind rose, whispering through the mesquite and sage. In it, faint and fragile, he thought he heard her name, Nayeli, carried to him like a prayer and a farewell all at once. It lingered in his heart, sweet as salvation, bitter as goodbye. And though the miles stretched endless before him, Jake knew he would ride them all with her name forever etched into his soul.